we were a little nervous as to what was actually happening, and then of course they appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and I think a lot of us kind of saw the writing on the wall on June 27th when the CASA decision came down. That was a really big day as well for this because I think at that point we kind of knew what this court was going to do for Donald Trump. And that was a rough day for a lot of us. And I we just kind of were waiting, waiting, waiting. And of course, on Monday the decision came down that they were going to stay the injunction, and essentially allow them to move forward with riffing us. And at that point, I think a lot of folks started to realize like what it actually meant. It wasn't just about not going back to work. It was about actually kind of tearing apart the department. And, for us, anybody who was following the case, they were seeing the reports from Rachel Oglesby, the chief of staff, and it was noted at one point that they were working on the memorandums of understanding between agencies to essentially start shifting duties. And I think a lot of us at that point knew that they're serious about actually dismantling the department and moving resources around and essentially eliminating many of the programs really of student access and success from the department, that really make a difference in students and families' lives. And I think that was the hardest part, I think, for me, is at that point, it's like, okay, well, I knew that at some point this was going to happen, but I didn't really realize like the national impact until, you start reading through these documents that they had submitted, that essentially were going to eliminate the department. With funding being cut, it's going to reduce the number of teachers. It's going to um, reduce the ability for us to make evidence-based change that we need. When parents have concerns, who do they reach out to? If there's nobody in those offices, it's going to be the delays in things. And so it's not going to be as easy to call federal student aid to find out what status of your FAFSA is. They're cutting contractors. And so what does that look like when it comes to processing pieces of work? Um, Data collections are going to be very difficult for educators, especially from the post-secondary lens, but also from the state and local lens, where agencies are trying to report their statistics to the department. If you have a question, you're not going to be able to get an answer right away because there's no staff there. Um, Civil rights complaints. I think that's what I'm extremely fearful of. When you have family and friends of students with disabilities who may not be able to get in contact with OCR to make complaints, that their school district are doing things um, that is harmful. And so you really reflect on those little pieces. It's going to be rough. And I think some of these things they're going to feel immediately, but I also think that there are a lot of things that they're not going to experience until 2 or 3 years from now. I mean, data collections, for example, at the higher ed level, stuff that you start reporting on this fall won't be finalized for 2 years typically. And so it's going to be a delay. We're just now seeing some of the data that are coming out of what happened during those COVID years, the 2020, 21 school year, the 21-22 school year. And now that we're 3 years out, those data are showing up and we can see what those changes were. And so we're not going to know what the impact of these cuts are going to be in a lot of ways until this administration is gone. And how do we rebuild that? And, what does Fix It 2029 look like?